So we noted that as we progress from the primary visual cortex towards the inferior temporal cortex in the dorsal stream, what we find is cells that are responding to more abstract properties of the world, and with that more meaningful properties of the world. There's a good example of this provided by the so-called Thatcher illusion. Now, you're probably not running around campus right now, but if you were in the science building, you would see this picture of Professor Brian Vonson, one of our physicists in UCD. And when you look at this picture, you might see that there's something wrong. I'm not sure. Can you see that there's something wrong here? Brian's a nice looking guy. If I turn that picture, oh, he's upside down, that's right. If I turn it the right way up, all hell breaks loose. That's before, that's after. This picture has been prepared by photoshopping out the eyes and inverting them, and photoshopping out the mouth and inverting them. It doesn't seem so troubling that way up, does it? And it seems intensely grotesque this way up. Now, to demonstrate that this effect is a high-level property that is, as it were, I don't like the term hardwired, but in this case we must almost say hardwired, that is, it's just built into your visual perception system. We can demonstrate that by continually moving this from upside down to right way up, like this. And what you'll find is that it moves from fairly benign, harmless, to utterly grotesque and ghastly. Now it's back being harmless again. And there it goes, being ghastly again. And it's like a switch goes off. And we could do this all day, and the angle at which that switch happens would not change. There's no learning involved here. What this demonstrates instead is that somewhere in here, your neurons are connected together in such a way that an upright face is recognized as a full face, whereas the upside down face is not. You still see the eyes and the mouth, and you're seeing the bits of the face. Most faces you encounter in life are, of course, the right way up, luckily. And so there's some neurons in there are responding selectively to the configuration of eyes, nose, and mouth. Not to the presence of eyes, nose, and mouth, but to their proper configuration. Those neurons don't care when it's upside down, but when the face is right way up, they expect the eyes and the mouth to look correctly. Of course, they don't. Now, figuring out what neurons do is a black art. And the claims made in the neuroscientific literature are always somewhat suspect because we do not have a confident grip on the brain. One example of the kind of hype that goes on in science is provided by a finding in the 1990s called mirror neurons. In the early 1990s, this was a chance finding that arose out of a laboratory in Italy, in Parma, and claims were made about these neurons, which developed into claims made about a system built of these neurons. And in all the descriptions, there's a whole bunch of theoretical presuppositions built in. So the story goes, this was a lab that was working with rhesus macaque monkeys, those same little monkeys that are found in most cognitive neuroscience labs that work with monkeys. And they were doing recordings from single units, in this case from units just above the eyeball in the prefrontal cortex. Sorry, a little further back. They were doing units in an area of frontal cortex, but not prefrontal, which was, they assumed and they understood to be involved in motor action. So they knew that these units would be highly active when the monkey itself does something in the world. And the story goes, late one night someone came by and there was a peanut in front of the monkey, and the kind of thing that would normally make this unit fire was when the monkey itself would pick up a peanut, and in this case the experimenter picked up the peanut and the unit fired as if the monkey was doing it. And this went, ooh. So this unit seems to be responding to seeing someone else doing the goal-directed action, and not to the monkey itself doing the goal-directed action. How should you interpret this? Well, what happened was these got labeled, these neurons. Let's say at the start, they are not visibly different from other neurons. It's questionable whether we have actually identified a kind of neuron here. We're distinguishing these neurons from their fellow neurons on the basis of their response properties under specific experimental circumstances. They became known as mirror neurons, and they set off a tsunami of speculation. You see, there are many ways to understand brains. In some particularly representational approaches to brains, perception is seen as something which arises from sensory input, then there's cognition, and then the brain causing the body to move is seen as something different, action. That was the framework that these researchers were using, and for them this seemed to provide a direct link from perception to action, and a great deal of speculation ensued. So mirror neurons, not monkey see, monkey do neurons, but the idea is this: the activity of this neuron happens when the monkey performs a specific goal-directed action, not just any old action, a goal-directed action such as picking up a peanut, and various other actions have since been identified, but also when it sees someone else doing the same thing. Now, we have to compare different frameworks here. Myself, I come from a school of embodied cognition in which perception and action are always inseparable. We call our little box jellyfish larva. The box jellyfish larva I interpreted as having a visual system, but it was indistinguishable from its action system. It was the same thing. So if there's someone like me, that's mirror neurons look like what you'd expect to find. But if you see perception as input and action as output, a different job done by a different part of the brain, and then you find these neurons, they look like a special purpose device responsible for all kinds of things. And the fact that they seemed to respond or care about goal-directed action is the kind of thing that sets theoreticians going. So those who see mirror neurons as hugely important started arguing that they were a possible basis for autism, a possible basis for empathy, for the evolution of tool use, for the evolution of language, for our enjoyment of sport. The fact that the activity of the neuron didn't distinguish between the monkey and someone else, but was concerned with the form of action, is what set all this theorizing off. It reached a peak about 15 years ago, about 2005, and the peak is dying down now. There's been a great deal of criticism of this work for precisely this kind of imaginative leap in the dark and overinterpretation of experimental results. On the other hand, without imagination, we'll never find out anything, will we? So there's plenty of room for disagreement here. There are some for whom mirror neurons represent a fascinating finding in the brain that has the potential to inform us about our humanity, and for others they don't even exist. Go figure.